to welcome you to this collaborative event with INEE inside the PSS-SEL Toolbox. Let's make sure we're clicking through. I am Natalie Brackett, and I'm the lead for ECCN. Before we begin today's program, we'll go over some kind of important webinar norms. Our auto closed captioning is available for those who want it by selecting the CC icon in Zoom. Ensure your display name matches your registration name, and if necessary, you can change that by hovering over your name and the ... on the participant list. And please mute your microphone when you're not talking. In case you missed our slide reminder, we are recording, so those that cannot attend today can access this information afterward. If you need technical support during the webinar, please send a private message on Zoom to me or Laurie, who is behind the lovely USAID ECCN admin account here on Zoom. And we'll do our best to make sure everything's situated. And feel free always to reach out using the chat function. That's the we are recording, folks. Now on to the good stuff, the wonderful, wonderful people we have who have worked on the toolbox itself and on producing this great event for you. So pleased to introduce Esther from INEE, the PSS-SEL coordinator, and the great connector of us all. Brian and Sonia from the EASL lab at Harvard, who will be talking through and truly taking you inside the toolbox. Elisa and Dativ from FHI 360, sharing a really cool case study for us to really think about how we're going to apply these resources. And hopefully it makes you as excited as I am to see some wonderful successes there. Here's a quick glance at how we're going to be spending our time together. I'm not going to belabor an agenda walkthrough, but I will say we hope that you come out of today understanding, oops, my apologies, I'm clicking too fast. We hope you come out of our time together today understanding the current challenges for PSS-SEL in education programs and the reason that this toolbox was created. We hope you understand how to navigate the toolbox site and explore the tools. We hope that you understand the potential uses of each tool and how they might be used in your work and the work of your organization. And again, we have a really exciting case study about how the toolbox has already been used in a USAID education activity in Rwanda. My turn to be quiet and to pass on again to the lovely folks we have presenting with us today. Esther, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, for kicking us off with such great, amazing energy. Hi, everyone. Esther Mbao, the PSS-SEL coordinator from INEE, and I'll be kicking us off today's workshop with an exercise. So as we do that, you've been informed, kindly update your Zoom name with your name, organization, and location. You could also feel free to let us know how your day is going using only emojis, if you're comfortable with that. And as we do that, I'll invite us, before we engage into the content, to do a short exercise. So kindly take me to the next slide. And my question for you as we start, is your mind full or are you mindful? And so I know we are all coming from different tasks. Maybe some of us are waking up, some of us have had a long day like myself. And I want us for the next 2 or 3 minutes to just be able to disengage from where we are coming from and be mindful, which is about being present for the next 80 minutes or so that we can make the best of our time together. So I'll invite us to sit comfortably on our seats. Wherever you're seated, ensure your family seated and your back is against your backrest. I'll invite you to relax a bit. And I know it's very hard in today's fast-paced world, but I'll just ask you to exhale as you sit comfortably on your chair. And if it's safe for you and if you're comfortable, I'll invite you to even close your eyes. Just for a moment, close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, I ask you to connect and listen to your breathing. When was the last time you listened to your breathing? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it trying to communicate that your mind is full? And so I want us to be mindful by taking intentionally 3 deep breaths. And with every breath, I want you to breathe in something you need for yourself. It could be energy, it could be focus, something positive. And then I want you to exhale by releasing something your system does not need and helping you to relax a bit more. So breathe in. Hold it. And exhale, breathe out. Listen to your breathing. Is it better? Breathe in again. A nice deep breath and journey with it into your system. Breathe in. Hold it for a second or two. And then breathe out. I hope you've relaxed a bit more by this time. And then one last amazing deep breath of positivity. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out slowly. And as you breathe out, if you had closed your eyes like myself, I invite you to come back to our presentation. I hope you're now more mindful. I hope you feel a renewed sense of energy. And as we do that, we can now get into a journey of the PSS-SEL Toolbox. So next slide, please. So I want to give us a project overview of what transpired for us to get to this point where we had this PSS-SEL Toolbox. And the thing about the PSS-SEL Toolbox, it's an initiative from INE's PSS-SEL Collaborative, which is currently the working group, and Harvard's ESEL Lab, which work together in a multi-year partnership to explore current approaches to PSS, and PSS is psychosocial support, and SEL, which is social emotional learning, within education in emergencies context. The goal of this partnership was to produce a set of tools and resources to support stakeholders conduct their PSS-SEL initiatives in coherent and coordinated ways, to improve the sector's ability to develop, implement, and understand the effectiveness of PSS-SEL initiatives in conflict and crisis settings. What motivated us to create this partnership and conduct this work is the general consensus among stakeholders that in the field of EIE, that PSS-SEL initiatives are not only desirable, but essential components in education programming. In fact, we know 2 things. First, the type of adversities that children experience in context or conflict crisis has lifelong negative effects on children's learning, behavior, physical and mental health. Second, we know that there's a growing body of research showing that the development of social, emotional skills is critical for the success of children and can mitigate the negative effects of conflict and crisis on the development of children. For this reason, stakeholders in the EIE settings are increasingly interested, and not only in the EIE settings, even in the education programming, are increasingly interested in promoting psychosocial support and social emotional learning. However, as we were coming into this partnership, we found that there's a lack of clarity and consensus about how to identify the specific social emotional skills that can best help children in settings of conflict and crisis to succeed in life. So having said that, and as we move to the next slide, we came together to conduct this project because we noticed that the field of PSS and SEL faced several challenges. Here are some of the challenges we faced. Many different frameworks for PSS and SEL, and they use many different names, definitions, and measurement strategies. Some organizations actually use the same name for different skills, and sometimes we use different names for skills that are similar or overlapping. The other challenge we faced is it makes it difficult to understand evidence tied to specific PSS-SEL skills, to communicate this effectively across organizations and partners, and to design programs that align measurement strategies to the specific skills or outcomes of interest. There's also a lack of transparency and coherence, hence a negative effect on the inability to promote, measure, and track progress of PSS and SEL efforts, which undermines our field as a whole. Yet we know PSS-SEL should be part of foundational learning. In addition, culture, context, and influence in terms of social and emotional development well-being, the research is mainly focused in the US and the Western stable context and reflect dominant white Western culture norms. This means that SEL skills, concepts, and approaches need to be contextualized in order to reflect local values and norms and be responsive to local needs as well. This field needs more research. We have just begun this journey, and more research is also needed in the EIE settings to understand culture and contextual variation, to design and promote efforts that are effective, meaningful, and locally relevant. We are also saying that we need to integrate existing evidence-based with new locally led research and program efforts and tools for communicating across different efforts. So the resources and lessons can be shared across contexts. And this is the reason we came together to put together the PSS-SEL Toolbox. On to the next slide. Our partnership responded to these challenges by developing a variety of resources that we packed into the PSS-SEL Toolbox. This slide actually shows you how our homepage looks like when you visit the PSS-SEL Toolbox. Please note the Toolbox is for you, hence it is free. It's an online set of tools to support PSS-SEL work in emergency and humanitarian contexts and in education programming generally, which we believe will promote coherence and coordination so that stakeholders can improve their work conducting a variety of PSS-SEL approaches and initiatives. Our approach involved working very closely with diverse stakeholders to inform each step of our work from beginning and throughout the entire process until now. In the Toolbox, we have categorized our tools into three major buckets. The first one is the data tools, which is interactive database and visual tools designed to help you, the user, explore different PSS-SEL frameworks and approaches. And these are currently used in over 50 countries and in different education programs. The second one is the localizing tools, which guides the user through a localizing process and contextualizing guidance to help you gather local input to inform your PSS-SEL work in the local context. And the third one is the resources, which includes additional information, guidance, and support. And these tools are designed to help stakeholders navigate the site, understand the data, and learn more about key concepts in psychosocial support and social emotional learning in education programming. In the next slide, I want to introduce you to what does it look like to be in the tools and therefore what purpose. We think that the tools are extremely useful and relevant for all individuals and organizations who are looking at the following categories. Do you want to gain insight about PSS-SEL in education programming? Then the toolbox is for you. Are you looking to compare PSS-SEL frameworks and skills currently used in global education? Then the toolbox will be a tool for you to keep actually as a favorite. Do you want to develop, refine, and adapt PSS-SEL frameworks, programs, or other materials? Then we invite you to engage with the toolbox. Are you looking to engage in a localizing process to ensure that your PSS-SEL efforts are culturally relevant? Then the toolbox will guide you on how to do this. Are you looking to develop indicators to track progress in the field? Then please visit the toolbox and make it your everyday user guide. And then if you want to identify core competencies and evidences in education programming when it comes to PSS-SEL, and if you also want to develop PSS-SEL measurement maps and design your tools for education programs, then the toolbox is for you, and you're in the right place today to be oriented into the toolbox or to be reoriented again. As we go to the next slide, I want to acknowledge that none of this work would have been possible without receiving input from a variety of stakeholders, which has been essential to our collective success, because we know if we come together collectively, then our success will be greater than if we continue to work as individuals. For example, our reference group and think tanks brought together global experts in PSS-SEL, including academics, researchers, practitioners, donors, and policymakers. And in 13 different countries, we partnered with 16 anchor organizations. Today, you get to hear from an anchor organization. And these anchor organizations comprised of representatives from ministries of education, local and international nonprofit organizations, university partners, consultants, among others. You can read more about our team and processes on the PSS-SEL Toolbox by visiting the page that will be dropped in the chat shortly for you to learn more about the different people and teams that we work with. As I hand over to Brian, I want to make note that 70 documents were identified through this project. Many were identified through outreach of the PSS-SEL Collaborative, which is now the PSS-SEL Working Group, and the Project Reference Group. Please note, as I mentioned earlier, this was a project of INI and ISLab that is based at Harvard. These documents can be grouped into three main types: teaching and learning materials, which include things like curriculum, teacher training manuals, and materials that educators can use to implement activities. We also have policy and guidance documents, which include things like traditional frameworks and policy guidelines that contain high-level information about the field. And lastly, we also have measurement and evaluation tools, because we always need to keep looking at, are we having impact, and how do we measure and evaluate this? These include documents intended to guide monitoring and evaluation activities, such as REPSI, participatory evaluation tools for measuring impact for psychosocial support, and the AMAL Alliance SEL assessment framework. With that, I now hand it over to Brian to actually take us now inside the toolbox. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Esther. So before we get started, just a few notes on what's included inside the toolbox. First, just a quick note on the languages. So currently the localizing tools are being translated into the INE languages. So these will be available in Arabic, French, Portuguese, and Spanish, in addition to the English that they are currently available in. And we would like to eventually translate the data tools in the entire website, but that would be a much bigger project and would be require future funding and future phases of work. And then addition to that, all of the linked INE resources from the resource section are available in all of the INE languages. Another note on the frameworks is that, as Esther talked a little bit about what's included with these documents, we use the term frameworks as a catch-all term to refer to any of the documents that are used in the delivery of PSS or SEL activities. During our outreach, we broaden the scope of what we consider frameworks to include many different types of documents, such as guidelines or training resources, curricula, textbooks, and others. And with those couple notes in mind, I will go ahead and walk us through some of the features of the toolbox. So we'll walk through, first I'll walk through some of the data tools, then I'll hand it over to Sonia to walk through some of the localizing tools. But we'll look at some of these data tools here, and I won't be able to walk through every feature of every tool, but I'll show some of the ways that these tools can be used. To do this, in this first scenario, I will just play as a user who wants to better understand the skills and contextual factors that affect well-being, with an emphasis on critical thinking in the Middle East and North Africa region. We can use these data tools to explore existing frameworks and the skills and definitions within them. So the first thing I'll do is I will look at which frameworks emphasize critical thinking. And so to do this, I'll use the Compare Domains tool. And here we'll see every framework in the toolbox and the extent to which they emphasize each of the 6 SEL domains. Here within this toolbox, those domains are cognitive, emotion, social, values, perspectives, and identity. We can start by seeing how much the frameworks compare in the domains they target. So since critical thinking is in the cognitive domain, I'll start by clicking on the cognitive domain to sort by that. And here we can see that the skills and competencies within the frameworks that are in the toolbox include skills related to the cognitive domain anywhere between 0 and 50% of that framework. And from here, we can see how much each subdomain contributes to this percentage. So if I were to show the subdomains, this is going to break down those domain areas into smaller groups of skills. Within the cognitive domain here, we've got 5 subdomains, one of which is critical thinking. And because that's what I'm interested in this particular walkthrough, I'll click on critical thinking. And we can see the framework sorted by how much critical thinking makes up that framework's cognitive skills. And from here, I can dive deeper into any of these frameworks to see how they address critical thinking. We can also use the Compare Frameworks tool to directly compare 2 frameworks. This tool allows us to see where frameworks include similar skills even when they're called different names. In this visual, we can select any framework on the left and any framework on the right and see where those skills are related to one another. So previously, I saw that the UNICEF India framework included critical thinking, so I can select that on the left. But how does this appear across other frameworks? So on the right, I'll select a second framework, such as the skills for health. And we can see where the skills across the frameworks are related to each other, again, based on how they're defined, not just based on what the skill name is. So here we can see that elements of critical thinking in the UNICEF India framework are related to 3 skills in the skills for health framework: negotiation refusal skills, cooperation and teamwork, and advocacy skills. So this may indicate that elements within these 3 skills are related to critical thinking, and I can click any one of these to investigate that further. A third tool that we have in the toolbox, the Compare Terms tool, shows where particular skills appear across all of the frameworks. Because again, I'm interested in critical thinking, I'm going to start with selecting critical thinking to see where skills within these frameworks have elements of critical thinking. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm also interested in particularly the Middle East and North Africa region, so I can filter by frameworks that are being used in that region. So I'll filter this down to region of use, Middle East and North Africa. And so this is showing critical thinking skills in the region that I'm interested in. Using these filters also make these tools a little bit more manageable because there are so many frameworks in the toolbox. We can see here which frameworks that have been used in the Middle East and North Africa and include elements of critical thinking. If I hover over, for example, this purple framework, which happens to be the Reimagining Life Skills and Citizenship Education, I can see that critical thinking appears in several of the skills, including creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. And any of these can be clicked on to see more information about how that framework is using these terms. But what about contextual factors that affect well-being? I can navigate to the Compare Well-Being tool, and you'll see that the filter for Middle East and North Africa retains across these. So I can use these filters across multiple tools. And in addition to critical thinking, I want to know more about which frameworks are addressing equity in my region of interest. So here we see 5 contextual factors: ecology, equity, health, safety, and adult support. And I'll click on equity to sort by that. And this is showing how much the framework documents address equity. So in this case, it's the foundational guidance, the adolescent toolkit for expression and innovation. This may be something that I want to look into a little bit more detail to see how it's addressing equity. To see in what ways this resource includes equity, I can also include more details by increasing the level of detail. And what this is going to do is break down each of these contextual factors. And here I can see that when this document is addressing equity, it is things like disability, emergency, development, and so on. Lastly, we can use the thesaurus to see where critical thinking is appearing in the frameworks in the toolbox. So here we can see all of the frameworks and all of the skills within them. And because I know what I'm searching for, I'm going to go ahead and use the search box to search for critical thinking. And this is showing me all of the frameworks that include critical thinking as the name of a skill. And if I were to choose one of these, I can see how that framework itself is choosing to define critical thinking. So here we have a page that's showing how critical thinking is defined in the Kenya Values and Life Skills Framework. We can see, if we scroll down, which skills and other frameworks are related based on how they're defined, much like a thesaurus, ordered by relatedness. We can also see which skill, or we can also see other frameworks that include the term critical thinking. If we scroll back up here in the also defined in, so this is a list of frameworks that also include critical thinking. And we can click on any of these to see how that framework might define this term slightly different or in some ways the same. We can also click here, view all definitions, and I can see how critical thinking is defined across 12 different frameworks in the toolbox. So I can understand how these are being defined across different contexts in frameworks that have been designed for different purposes. So these tools are going to allow me to better understand the skills that I'm interested in this example, critical thinking, and to see how the skill appears across all the frameworks in the toolbox. So before I hand this over to Sonia to go over the localizing tools, I can pause here for any questions. And if they come after a little while, you can add them to the chat, and there'll be a few moments here to take questions. So if you're still formulating the question, please throw it in the chat, and we'll definitely make sure we address that. But if there's not, I can hand it over to Sonia.
Thanks so much, Brian. Also, questions, of course, welcome for Esther, any of the INEE or working group folks that were part of the development or process or background we heard. And just a note again to say my deepest apologies for our slide misalignment at the beginning. This presentation will be shared after the fact. And again, just kudos to Esther for giving us a really cohesive narrative behind the toolbox, despite some of the challenges with our presentation materials. Brian, we do have a question in the chat about the tools and frameworks and whether they are open source or how to cite them or seek permission for use.
Is this referring to the tools themselves or the frameworks that are behind them? I can say that the frameworks that are included in the toolbox, Sonia, you might have a better recollection of how many of these are publicly available. I would say a lot of them are, most of them, but there are some documents that were sourced from organizations that might not be publicly available. Is that correct, Sonia?
Yeah, that's correct. The vast majority are publicly available, but not all of them. And the toolbox itself and those tools are, of course, free and available for anyone to use.
Awesome. Pulling from the chat and folks' comments more than questions, I would say, even in the introduction, we have a lot of folks who are maybe familiar with or remember the initial version of this toolbox and the framework tool. It looks like folks in general complimenting, I would say, celebrating the comprehensiveness of these tools and resources. Some interest in what is new, what is the latest development, and something to keep their eyes on as they join this particular session.
I just want to flag my question in the chat. I'm wondering if you could speak to, it's so great to have access to all of these different frameworks and to understand the specific skills that each of them aligns with. So since we all like to measure these skills, and this tends to be a challenge, are any of these frameworks linked to measurement tools on the toolbox?
Not right now, but that is something we are hoping to do. There is a section, we'll walk through some of the additional resources later. There is a section that does have a report that was put together to start thinking about how these frameworks could be linked to measurement tools. So that is a report that's on there. But actually on the website, creating links from frameworks to measurement tools, that is something we are hoping to expand this website to do.
Great.
And actually,
Thanks,
to
Brian.
go back, yeah, and to go back, maybe I'll show one more thing. To go back to the question about the frameworks being available. If they are, each framework does have a page. I didn't walk through this just for sake of time. Each framework does have a page where it gives all of the information. If it is available, you can link to the framework itself. If it is not something that is publicly available, there'll still be this link to contact the developer. So there are options on the website here to either view the framework or to contact the developer if that framework is not publicly available.
It looks like some folks might be having trouble with the specific link we are sharing in the chat. I'm gonna look into that. And thank you so much for pointing that out. Some folks are getting a not secure sign, so we'll make sure we have the right hyperlink there for you in just a sec. There's another question in the chat about the frameworks and evidence for working specifically with deaf children in emergencies. Or perhaps if that doesn't immediately surface any ideas, using some of these frameworks in inclusive ed spaces.
So I can't think off the top of my head of a framework that is specifically for deaf children in emergency settings. I will say that there are a few tools that might be able to help you kind of narrow in on that question, though. One is the tool that looks at the contextual factors that affect well-being and kind of honing in on the equity. Maybe I'll just go ahead and share my screen and kind of walk you through what I'm thinking, if that's okay. So one way that I would go about answering that question is going into the data tools and look specifically at compare well-beings and that compare well-being, and then I would filter by equity, wanting to see equity here, and then I would hover over the different components of equity to see disability, and I might see then in this column which ones have kind of the darkest blue to see which frameworks are mostly more focused or have more emphasis on disability. And then maybe have a look at those to see if they have any reference to specifically deaf children. I'll also say that one of the frameworks that's included here is the the oh goodness, now I'm blanking on it. I just had it in my head. We have one that's really focused on inclusive education. Let me pop it in the chat in a few minutes when it comes back to me.
Well, fabulous, Sonia. Thank you for the kind of specific user quick guide of how you might start to narrow in on these tools and resources. Really cool demo that the question prompted there. While you are front and center, I think it is your turn to take the stage and speak a bit to the localization tools for the toolbox.
Great, thanks, Natalie, and thank you, Brian, for going over the data tools. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so I'm going to put us right here in the localization tools page. So to have a look through the localizing tools, let's consider another scenario in which a user wants to create a framework to guide their work in a setting that does not already have a contextualized framework. We can actually use all 5 of the localizing tools in the toolbox to help us with this scenario. So the first one that we're going to look at is the Identify Local Needs and Assets tool. I already have it open over here. So this tool can be used to identify the PSS and SEL needs and assets in a given context. It includes steps for reflecting on objectives, planning for gathering information from the community, engaging with local stakeholders, and then synthesizing what we have learned from those steps. And before we go too deep into the Identify Local Needs and Assets tools, I do just want to say that each of the localizing tools can be used individually, or they can be used together as part of a larger contextualization process, which is how we'll be walking through them together today in our scenario. So now with this scenario that I'm planning, I would like to engage with stakeholders, and I would like to know what questions can help me with this. So I'm going to scroll past all of our kind of planning steps and scroll all the way down to a question bank that can help me pull out questions to, there we go. Okay, so here I would like to use the question bank to build out my set of questions that I would like to use to engage with stakeholders. And these are broken down into categories. There are questions for children and youth learning goals, learning context and practices, social and cultural values, roles, assets, and norms, and guided questions for engaging children and youth. So from this list, I can select questions that I want to use to better understand the needs and goals of the community. So for example, I may choose the questions, what does it mean for a child or youth to be successful in your setting? Or how do you know when children and youth are learning effectively? What does it look like? The answers to these questions will help me better understand what I may need to include in a localized framework. So that's just one feature of this tool, but for sake of time, I'm going to move us now to the next localizing tool, which is the Learn About Skills tool, which I already have open right here. So once I've identified my local needs, I can learn more about what the research says about these skills using the Learn About Skills tool. Learn About Skills provides a brief summary of research on PSS and SEL, along with concrete descriptions of 24 skills and 30 contextual factors that are linked to positive outcomes for children and youth. You will recognize that these are the same skills that kind of sit behind the data tools that Brian walked us through. And this tool really just has a lot more information about these different domains. I'm going to scroll down to show you the inventory of skills. Here it is. Okay, so like I mentioned before, in addition to skills identified by local stakeholders, I can use the Learn About Skills tool and this inventory in particular to identify skills and competencies linked to child outcomes. And in this table, I can see the skills, their related names, and a description for each of them. And then I can also use this tool to have a closer look at the contextual factors that affect well-being, including high-level descriptions of each of those and a more detailed inventory of the specifics within that. And then I can use a reflection guide to really put these skills into context with kind of my own setting and the potential local needs or manifestations of these skills or contextual factors that affect well-being in my setting. Okay, that is a very quick look at Learn About Skills. So now we're going to just briefly talk about using the data. So this localizing tool called the Use the Data tool provides an overview of the data tools that Brian reviewed previously. So during this step, I may want to learn more about the existing frameworks and better understand how skills are defined in different contexts. I may be able to pull in skills and definitions from frameworks that were developed in or used in my context. So if you're ever kind of getting to the data tools and feeling a bit lost, this Use the Data tool section can be a really helpful place to come back to, as it has more guidance and videos for each of the tools for how to use them effectively. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the Prioritize for Local Context tool, which I have open right here. The Prioritize for Local Context tool can help us reflect on local PSS and SEL priorities, organize and define key concepts in alignment with local objectives, and plan for next steps in our setting. So once I've identified skills from local stakeholders, from the inventory of skills, and from existing frameworks, I can use this tool to find alignment between these skills. I'm just scrolling down. You can see there are a lot of different steps kind of mapped out for how to do this. And I'm just going to pause here to show you that kind of alignment step of where we can pull in the needs of our setting, the relevant skills and concepts, other literature resources or research, as well as existing frameworks and terms. And in this reflection section, I can identify areas of overlap, similarity, or gaps in what I have found so far. Then I can take these further and create concrete, clear, developmental, and contextual definitions of the relevant skills or features of well-being. And these can be used to engage with stakeholders to map the skills. So these are just different kind of example activities that one could engage with. This is like a mapping exercise that you might choose to use to engage with the community to map different skills. And then following some kind of community engagement exercise, the final step is synthesis. And this really allows us to synthesize the themes and observations found from stakeholder engagement and also reflect on our conclusions. Okay, so that is a very quick look at Prioritize for Local Context. And lastly, we're going to have a look at Validate for Local Context. So once the skills for my framework have been identified, mapped, and synthesized, it's important to validate the framework. The Validate for Local Context tool can be used to plan and carry out a set of activities that engage the local community members in providing feedback on the relevance and fit for PSS and SEL materials. So with this tool, I can reflect on what is needed for the validation process, plan to collect stakeholder feedback, engage with stakeholders, and synthesize this learning into recommendations and revisions to my newly created framework. And I will scroll down so that you can see a template we have included here for what that planning of a validation process could look like. So in this example, I can plan to engage local stakeholders such as teachers, as this example includes. So I can get really specific about who I'm engaging, where, what it will look like, our objectives, and notes. And ultimately, the tool can help me use this feedback to revise my localized framework. Okay, now I think we're going to hear from Dativ and Alyssa for a really wonderful example of how the toolbox was used in Rwanda. So I will pass it off to you all.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sonia, for that wonderful walkthrough. We love these tools. So hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Skyrick. I'm a Senior Technical Officer on the Education and Emergencies team at FHI 360. We had the privilege of serving as an anchor organization during the Toolbox development, working with one of our programs in Democratic Republic of Congo, developing some community-based SEL. But today we're going to talk about our program in Rwanda that used the tools in a more finished form. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Dativ Niyategeka in Rwanda to introduce herself and get us started. You can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, everyone. I'm Dativ Niyategeka, Literacy Advisor at FHI 360 Rwanda and the Schools and System Project. Nice to be with you. The Tunaza Gusoma project, which is called Let's Improve Reading, it's a 5-year project in partnership with Rwanda Ministry of Education bodies. Those are Rwanda Basic Education Board, National Examination and School Inspection Authority. It is a nationwide program which is implemented in 3,361 schools. It is focusing on Kinyarwanda literacy in pre and lower primary levels, especially on the system strengthening, teacher professional development, material development, and foundational skills, including SEL.
Next slide.
Yes, thank you. As SEL is a central part of our project objectives around foundational skills, as well as priority for Rwanda Basic Education Board, our project in collaboration with Rwanda Basic Education Board, we collaborated and decided to develop a SEL framework. A SEL framework which is linked with the competence-based curriculum, a framework which is really aligned with that curriculum, which is aligned with the competence and values and even priorities of our country, rather than using or accepting any other framework which is not responding to our needs. So the framework that we have now used a recognized national process for curriculum development. So it is adapted as part of national policy. And also the framework that we started implementing in our schools clarifies roles and responsibilities for each stakeholders in our education system. Teachers now know what they have to do, school leaders know their roles and responsibilities, and so on. I want to mention also that the framework that we are now having is matching with the local language and understanding because it includes the versions made in local language, which is our mother tongue Kinyarwanda. And again, because of all of that, we have a framework which helped our teachers to start implementing, to start using, to update by teachers and also other stakeholders, because looking at the journey that we made, looking at the process that it took, we have the framework, which is a product, which is reflecting our culture, our needs, our values, our priorities, and also our framework is also looking at the sustainability. It is promoting the sustainability because it is owned by everyone from top to down. Thank you.
Right, next slide. So this was a 1-year process from starting the conversation with the ministry to the final adoption of the framework as a national policy in Rwanda. And because Tunaza Gusoma is a full partnership with our partners at the ministry, REB, this isn't just a USAID project SEL activity, it's a national initiative, which meant that we were guided by the national curriculum development process. So the PSS-SEL Toolbox gave us those tools to work within that process, to provide our Rwandan education stakeholders and experts with a tailored process to connect global evidence and global best practice with local knowledge and local resources. So kind of working from the inside out of this graphic, we used various components of the toolbox that Sonia was just showing you. First, to analyze the existing SEL resources with our stakeholders and experts in a series of workshops. As Dativ said, this SEL framework is deeply linked to the existing competence-based curriculum, as well as to the pre-primary and primary literacy curriculum, as well as with other SEL programs already in use in Rwanda. And then you can see from the photos around the parts of the toolbox that we use throughout this process. So it's a toolbox, not a set of instructions. So the way it works is that you select what works for you and what fits into your process. So first we use the Learn About Skills tool to help our participants generate a shared understanding of SEL and what SEL really means in this context and what skills are relevant. Then we use the data tools to help us understand the frameworks already in use and analyze how SEL already existed in the curriculum and just in the culture around child development and education. Then we use the Identify Needs and Assets tool to conduct focus group discussions and other brainstorms, like that chart you see on the top left in the red pen. And you can see in the photo below the two men at the window, that's our process of actually voting on the skills and how to frame them and phrase them in the local language. Then over on the right, the Prioritize tool helped us actually organize our skills into a framework and ensure it aligned with the curriculum. So you can see one of our very, very early drafts was just a list in that flip chart on the bottom right. And then eventually the framework drafts were iterated and revised and eventually validated and approved by the ministry. So you can go to the next slide. So this is our final product. It's now been adopted as the National SEL Framework for pre-primary and lower primary. You can see, so the framework is that graphic on the right. On the left column, you can see the 6 main competences of the Rwandan competence-based curriculum. That's what we started with. Plus we have one additional domain for emotion that we added to highlight how emotion skills are implicit across the competence-based curriculum. Then in the middle column, we have 7 SEL domains, and each of those has 2 skills. But one thing to note that came out of this process is that we reframed it as skills, values, and mindsets to better reflect how Rwandan language, culture, and curriculum address social emotional learning. And we could probably talk about this for another couple hours, but I'll just point out really quickly, there's a few little areas that make this framework really Rwandan. One is that, obviously not here, but we have a version all in local language. That was really the core of it. And so this English is a translation of those local terms. But another thing that I think just shows how this process can really bring out what stakeholders really mean and what's important to them is you might notice in the very bottom in the green, the second from last skill in the right-hand column, it's called conflict management. We almost always see this, even in all the other terms in that glossary on the data tools, as conflict resolution. But it was really important for our stakeholders to show how children should understand conflict management as a more nuanced picture, including accepting blame and giving forgiveness. So they're just some unique parts of this framework. And this framework is now informing our project's work and the whole Ministry of Education's work to integrate SEL across the project and the national education system for pre and lower primary. And Dativ and I are happy to talk about this and the actual implementation of the intervention another day. Today, we're just talking about the framework development with the toolbox, so we'll go ahead to some lessons learned on the next slide. So first, the toolbox is intended as a resource to help bridge evidence and practice. We know SEL is already happening anywhere there are children, even if it's not explicitly using that terminology or it's not explicitly a named intervention. SEL is already happening everywhere and we have local experts everywhere. So instead of coming into a context with an international framework, just because there isn't yet recognized local evidence or local intervention, the toolbox offers tools and a process to elevate that local knowledge and leverage the resources that are already there and working in context. But this is still a major undertaking, and to ensure it's fully locally owned and sustained requires a big investment of time and resources to build that trust with local stakeholders and a multi-stage process of sharing knowledge and iterating versions. And as I said, it took about a year just to get a final framework, not even to design any materials. And also for that local ownership and sustainability, SEL has to be integrated, both by developing it through established processes and systems, and also by incorporating it into the curriculum, resources, and practices already in place. And finally, our big lesson is that the process is as important as the product. Our ministry partners and other stakeholders and our team are super proud of this national framework as a product, but really it works because they understood, drove, and owned the process. The toolbox isn't a set of instructions, it's a set of tools and resources that we can share with all stakeholders to approach the process together. And I'll be happy to share contact information for any questions people have about this process or this product or our team. And thank you so much to ECCN and everyone for hosting us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elisa and Dativ. Folks, we have a really nice luxury of some time here for question and answer on the case study you just learned about of applying these tools in Rwanda, or about the localizing tools or any other background you have heard on the toolbox so far. The floor is open for anyone who would like to come off mute and verbalize a question. Also, feel free to use the chat, and we can look into the running list of questions as well. Seeing lots of appreciation, and yes, folks very impressed by this work in Rwanda. Agreed. There's an ask for our FHI colleagues around any published literature from your implementation example. Do you have any links you could drop?
Yeah, let me see if I can find the link. We have number one, not on Rwanda, but we have our case study. And I think, Sonia, you might even have slides about other case studies from the Anger organization. So we have one from our team in the DRC. And then for Rwanda, we actually are in the process of getting some information out on the Rwanda Basic Education Board, the Ministry of Education website. So not like an academic article, but I'll be sure to share that when it's available.
Awesome. Yes, definitely the type of thing hopefully we'll be able to share across ECCN platforms, INEE platforms. We now have a very eager audience to continue learning about Rwanda. Let's see. All right, yes, and thank you so much, Sonia, for dropping the link to the case studies. So much to explore on the Toolbox site. I know that this is maybe takes us back to some of the foundation high level information we heard at the beginning. So Esther, this question may be for you or Brian or Sonia, or even Julia or any of the wonderful working group members. There was something surfaced in the chat around how the frameworks and tools were selected, which I know we've touched briefly on, and some confirmation. Are these all evidence-based?
I'll take the first pass at that, but Brian, please jump in. That's a great question. So framework development is not necessarily always evidence-based, and our approach to what we would include in terms of frameworks on the site was to cast like a wider net in order to really try to source as many things as we could that were, developed and used outside of the global north, because so much of kind of PSS and SEL work is often, originating in the global north and then kind of being transferred to the global south. And so we really tried to find things that were locally generated. I will say that was not always the most successful, because I think there really is, or at that point in time in 2019, there were far fewer things that were being generated and used kind of from the context that they were trying to serve. But you can find information about you know, about where each of the frameworks was developed in the like framework profiles that Brian shared. I think we also have included links when they were available, like if a framework was, you know, more evidence-based and had like a published paper about its process or whatever, we've included links there when possible. Does that answer the question? Brian, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think you answered it.
I do see a question from Kate about, are we still collecting tools for the toolbox? And evolution in the future, maybe around measures and instruments. That's such a great question. We are really trying to move into kind of a second phase of the toolbox, and we've actually just submitted a proposal to do that. So we have very high hopes to soon be launching a call to collect more tools to include in the toolbox, which we really hope this time around to find many more locally generated frameworks, but also potentially, and this is really kind of our big vision for the future, is to actually link not just frameworks, but frameworks, measures, and practices so that we can understand what people aim to do from their frameworks, what they actually do in terms of the practices and programs that they use to teach these skills, and then how they're assessing and measuring those through their measures and assessment tools.
Excellent information and seeds planted for this group, folks who are eager and interested to utilize the toolbox, learn more about the toolbox, and take action after learning more today. Yeah, I think the demand and next steps seem a little clear around these measurement tools, right? Pretty exciting to feel that energy. Taking us back to Rwanda, there was a question in the chat about private sector engagement or involvement. And if you did engage the private sector, do you have any thoughts on that process or your methods?
So I can take an initial stab in Dativ if you want to add anything. So this was all through the Ministry of Education, the Rwanda Basic Education Board. So they were really deciding like, which stakeholders were involved, who was in the room, because it was their process. But I think he dropped off, but we have a sister project in Rwanda called Schools and Communities that's working more closely with the private sector, but kind of links into Tunoze Kusoma, and they are kind of our link to the private sector. Mike, I think, dropped off, but it's World Vision. And Dativ, do you want to add anything else about how we engage partners?
Sure. With engaging private sectors, because we also did a journey of developing the leveling criteria for the children's storybooks in English and in Rwanda. And in collaboration with REB, Rwanda Basic Education Board, we have agreed on priority themes, priority topics that writers and publishers have to focus on. SEL, social emotional learning, is one of those priorities. We have trained publishers, we have trained all writers for children books, and now we have a collection of English storybooks for primary 1, primary 2, primary 3, plus the read aloud for pre-primary, and also for Kinyarwanda language. And social emotional learning was among those priority themes. I think with that journey, we will continue to engage other private sectors, but this is an example of writers and publishers that we already started to collaborate and work together to make sure that social emotional learning component is also reflected in the books for children, not only the core materials like teacher guides and student book, but also supplementary reading books. Thank you. I don't know if I responded to the question.
I think you did. And again, just as you mentioned at some point, this process, like I could hear about this for hours. I'm so interested in all the players and details that you have so thoughtfully involved in this. And it looks like our question asker in the chat was excited and satisfied with what you've shared too. We have time for maybe one more question. I'm not sure if I see a specific one in the chat for any of the presenters. There is a note about someone working with grad students in research and thinking about possibilities for this toolbox or for future crowd sourcing data analysis. Clearly some excitement and volunteering being offered by the folks who have learned more today. Pretty cool to see that engagement. And thanks to everyone, all the presenters sharing links in the chat. Sonia, go ahead. But you're muted.
Sorry. I just wanted to say an extra thank you to everyone for all the energy around this and excitement around next steps. We will certainly be in touch as soon as we are looking for more frameworks and measures and tools to be added to the site. And we will appreciate your engagement at that point.
Awesome. We did have two more questions come across here as we had our last call for questions. A quick practical one. Is there a selection tool for stakeholders in the toolbox?
I don't know if it's a selection tool, but I can answer that. Basically, in every step, one of the things that you're kind of questioning and reflecting on is who should be on the team that you're there. So it kind of recognizes like you're probably going to start out not with everyone that you want helping and making decisions. You're going to be starting with, like a project team. And so maybe for different elements, you're going to have different people in the room. But one example of the way that it's kind of tailored for that is so the focus group discussion questions in the identifying needs and assets tool, there's actually different sets of focus group questions for different stakeholders, including children, and different instructions for how to kind of get that information from different stakeholders. So I think that was the question being asked.
I think so. Awesome. This is maybe a less to the point question, but I open it up to any of our speakers or anyone with thoughts on, to me, I am not an expert in this area, so a bit of a nebulous, interesting, future looking. What do we think about use of AI for analysis or comparison of any of these tools?
Yeah, I'll take this. We are looking into this actually. And so we're hoping in the next phase to start exploring how AI can be used. We're excited more on the back end of the coding work that goes behind all of this. Right now is a very manual, long process. So we're looking at the potential of using AI for the behind the scenes coding, but also for, it would be great for people to be able to upload their own framework to see how it compares to things using AI. So there are a lot of opportunities, and we're looking forward to taking the time to see which one of those could work, which ones might not work. So it's going to take a little bit of time to investigate that and see the potential. So hopefully that will help some of this.
That's really cool. Wow. Again, not a thought I had, but so glad to hear that it's already in the works, and what a cool use of that. We should probably move on to, again, there's just been great energy here and enthusiasm for what's next. So I believe, Sonia, I'm on to you for looking at what other resources are available to folks. And then Esther, our true host here of INEE's PSS-SEL work, will close us out.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to go ahead and return us to the toolbox. I think, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so here we are in the resources section of the toolbox. And this really has many different types of resources. Since we've just been talking about case studies, I'm going to jump there to show you the case studies. And these are from our really amazing group of anchor organizations who partnered with us to use the toolbox to move their existing work in PSS and SEL forward as the kind of a field testing process as we were in the development phase of the toolbox. So you'll hear from many different folks really around the world through videos, but also really written thorough, comprehensive explanations of how they used the tools to move their work forward. And the case study that we talked about actually that Alyssa's team at FHI 360 worked on was from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you can find that there, as well as a video of Laurent from that team speaking about their work here. So those are the case studies. Now I want to show you the toolbox resources because I think these can be really helpful for folks in navigating the toolbox. First, there is a decision tree that can really walk you through a number of questions to help you understand how to engage with the toolbox, basically which tools might be useful for you. So you can start off with answering the question of whether or not you need a framework and then be guided to a number of different endpoints based on your answers to those questions. Then there's a user pathways tool that really walks through different examples of how folks can engage with the toolbox and the various localizing tools to meet a number of different objectives that they may have. And this has really concrete guidance around, for example, I know folks here are interested in measurement. And so I'm going to scroll down to, there we go. An objective, for example, to find and select measures to assess PSS and SEL in your context. And so this little user pathway can help you figure out how you could use the different localizing tools to meet that objective through concrete kind of steps. Okay, and then lastly, I just want to show you here the framework fit checklist, which you could use to figure out if an existing PSS and SEL framework meets your needs, again, through a series of questions. So those are all available on the Toolbox resources section, in addition to some more information about the frameworks, that those 70 documents that Brian showed us in the data tools. There's more information about those here and here, kind of an analysis of those. And we also have a literature review, which could be really helpful for folks who are just getting started in PS and SEL, particularly in education and emergency settings. Okay, the other resources that are linked here are different kind of curated selections from INEE's different resources available. So for example, for folks new to PSN SEL, we have linked the kind of core important documents from INEE on those here. We also have conflict-sensitive education packed. We have information about gender and inclusive education and teacher well-being. And lastly, I know many folks on the call are really interested in measurement and assessment. And so I do want to just highlight that we have a number of resources linked here that could be useful to you, including a kind of mapping exercise where we mapped measurement tools to global guidance documents, many of which are frameworks that are on the site. We're also linking to the INEE measurement library where you can find measures to use in your work. And lastly, as a recent kind of last thing we did on the toolbox was we put together a mapping report that can help you kind of imagine what it could look like to have measures linked on the site and to kind of look at the data from the site in connection to a good number of measures really pulled from the INE measurement library. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will pass it back to Esther for our closing.
Thank you, Sonia, for taking us through the resources. Thank you, Brian, as well, for taking us inside the toolbox. Both of you have done an amazing job to orient us on just a very high-level introduction and orientation into the toolbox. Thank you, Natalie, for keeping the energy and bouncing back the amazing energy we're getting from our participants. Like we said, this is an orientation meeting. So we invite you to, now that you have been oriented, kindly explore the toolbox further. Reach out to us if you have any requests, require any more support, want to give us any feedback, and even share case studies. I think from this session, the energy once you get into the toolbox is amazing because you get to really orient yourself and to discover that I may just need a definition and I'll get it in the toolbox. I may need a framework and I'll get it in the toolbox. I need to compare something and it's there. So keep the energy moving by exploring the toolbox further. With a genuine interest, kindly reach out to INE. I see there's already a request in terms of how can we capacity build in terms of PSS-SEL. Kindly feel free to reach out to me on email and we can push this conversation further by linking you with other INE members in the region you have mentioned in your message. We will also be able to share the materials and the trainings that we have when it comes to PSS-SEL, and they're also found in the toolbox. Please note, this is PSS-SEL Toolbox 1.0. As Brian had mentioned and Sonia, we are hoping to have PSS-SEL Toolbox 2.0 coming soon. So please keep engaging and giving us the feedback because this will help us as we get into 2.0. Also, we've seen the suggestions in terms of what you can do. Feel free to also email me and we can start creating a database of what you would want in terms of supporting us with or how you can come in to support us with the project once it kicks off, and send in your ideas as well. We truly, truly want to keep engaging with you. So I hope this has been an insightful session for all of you. Thank you, Elisa and Atif, for just taking us into the toolbox as well. It felt very practical that what we are orienting people on can work, is working, and it should keep working with all the endless possibilities that the toolbox open our minds to. And Brian and Sonia, let's keep working on the toolbox. I think, like we keep saying, this is a toolbox for other people. We are just here to just ensure it's up and running. So Natalie, thank you for moderating it. I hand it back to you to close it for us.
For sure. Just what a lovely group. Thank you so much to everyone who joined today. Of course, again, where this all lives and generated from is from you, from a network of folks working on this, and will live on through INE and EASL Lab's efforts. Thank you for being part of the ECCN platform as well. Of course, I hope you're on our listservs. I hope you're on our LinkedIn. You arrived here today and we're grateful for that. You will receive a follow-up I believe from the Eventbrite registration that will share the recording of this, and keep an eye out on ECCN and INE for future communications around the work ahead and the follow-up from this session today. We're so grateful for all of you. Good luck with your wonderful work out there in the world, and thank you for your time. See you again.